A retired veteran, John Carter, uncovered a buried chest by Willow Creek that revealed decades of hidden war crimes and dangerous secrets. Powerful figures, determined to keep the truth buried, moved swiftly to silence him, threatening both his safety and the memory of history. But John, with the help of journalist Amelia Hayes and the steadfast loyalty of his dog Max, found a way to bring the truth into the light. Just wait until you hear how this quiet lakeside town became the stage for a battle where justice finally won, and why Willow Creek will never be the same again. John Carter had always believed his life would quiet down after the Army. After decades in service, facing the chaos of distant lands, he had longed for peace. Willow Creek, a small lakeside town in Maine, offered exactly that. A place where mornings arrived slowly, where mist curled above the water, and where time seemed measured in the gentle lapping of waves. His home was a modest cabin at the edge of the lake, built from weathered timber, with a porch that overlooked the water. It was here, in this solitude, that John healed. By his side was Max, a loyal German shepherd with a coat the color of autumn chestnuts. Max had been with John for years, a silent companion through restless nights and lonely mornings. The two had a routine, long walks along the shore, where John would watch the sunrise while Max sniffed the air and trotted ahead. The lake was their sanctuary, untouched by hurry or conflict, until the morning everything changed. It was early October. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Fog hung low over the water, making the world seem like a place out of memory. John clipped on Max's leash, and they set out toward the shoreline. The lake was calm, glass-like, with only occasional ripples where fish broke the surface. John's boots crunched against damp sand as Max wandered close to an old oak tree. The tree had stood there for decades, its roots curling into the soil like silent fingers. Max stopped, sniffing the base of the tree, and then, without warning, began digging furiously. John called his name softly, but Max was relentless. The dog's paws tore through the sand with surprising force, uncovering something solid beneath. John crouched beside him, brushing sand away with his hands. A corner of something metallic glinted in the morning light. The more John cleared away, the more the shape revealed itself, a chest, old and weathered, coated in rust and worn by time. It was far too deliberate to be random debris. John felt a knot of curiosity tighten in his chest. Military training had taught him to notice details, and something about this chest stirred that instinct. It wasn't merely lost, it had been hidden. With effort, John pulled it free. The wood was cracked but sturdy, the ironwork corroded but holding fast. The lock was intact, an antique padlock sealed shut with age. John ran a hand over it, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. Something about the discovery felt like more than a relic. This chest had a purpose. He set it gently on the sand and knelt beside it. Max sat nearby, watching with an alert stillness that mirrored John's own. Slowly, John worked at the lock, coaxing it open with tools from his pocket-knife. There was a satisfying click, followed by a soft groan of wood as the lid gave way. Inside lay bundles of letters tied in faded ribbons, blue, cream, and pale red. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the ink faded with age. Each bundle bore the name Eleanor in careful handwriting. John lifted the first letter, unfolding it with reverence. The words were elegant, filled with emotion, but beneath them was something else, a thread of secrecy. These were not ordinary love letters. John's breath caught. His mind raced. In war, letters had meaning beyond words. They carried orders, secrets, confessions. The way these letters were bound, hidden, and preserved suggested something deliberate. Someone had gone to great lengths to protect them, and whoever Eleanor was, her story, and what was hidden in those pages, was no small matter. John closed the chest, his heart pounding. Max nuzzled his hand, sensing the tension. For the first time in years, John felt the stirrings of purpose. This was not just a quiet lakeside life anymore. This was the beginning of something he could not ignore. Something buried, both in the sand and in history itself, was waiting to be uncovered. And John Carter was about to find out what it was. The morning after the chest was found, John Carter returned to the cabin with the bundle of letters wrapped in old ribbon. He spread them across his work table, the dim light of the kitchen casting long shadows over the fragile pages. Max lay at his feet, eyes fixed on him, as if sensing the weight of what was to come. John opened the first letter with care. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost intimate. As he read, a story began to emerge, one of Eleanor, a woman whose life was quietly intertwined with the chaos of war, and Samuel Green, a man whose name was unfamiliar to John, but whose deeds would soon shock him beyond belief. Samuel was described as a decorated officer, a man of honor, in Eleanor's words. But their correspondence revealed something hidden, a secret relationship kept from the world, written in hushed tones that hinted at danger. Page after page spoke of clandestine meetings, coded references, and expressions of fear. The letters spoke of plans, of movements, and of something Samuel called the burden we must protect. The deeper John read, the more a pattern emerged. These were not just personal notes. They were a thread leading to something much larger. Then came the last letter. Dated August 3rd, 1945, its words struck John with a force he could hardly comprehend. Samuel wrote openly of a hidden cache of military documents, a collection of intelligence files he had carried away from the front lines. But more than that, he confessed to actions in war that could not only tarnish his own legacy, but destroy the reputations of others, names that echoed in history books as heroes. The letter named names. Senior officers still respected, still remembered, now implicated in acts they had hidden for decades. John's breath caught. He read the passage again. The tone was final, almost like a will. Samuel described burying the chest, ensuring the letters and documents would remain hidden until the truth could be faced. And then there was something chilling, a line that simply said, "If I disappear, let this find those who must know." The chest was Samuel Green's. The knowledge inside was dangerous. The discovery was not random, it was a message. By noon, Willow Creek was no longer the quiet town John had known. Word of the discovery had spread like wildfire. The lakefront was swarming with curious faces, locals, reporters, history enthusiasts. Cameras and notepads appeared as journalists arrived to cover the story. Soon, historians who specialized in World War II showed up, drawn by the possibility of lost documents of great significance. Then the government came. Plainclothes agents moved through the crowd, quietly asking questions. They approached John at his cabin, offering assurances that it was for national security, but making it clear the chest would need to be handed over. John listened politely, but beneath his calm was a storm. John understood the stakes. These letters could rewrite history, but he also knew they carried danger. For him, for Willow Creek, for anyone who spoke too loudly about them. The old instincts of a soldier returned, the awareness that truth sometimes comes at a cost. That night, John sat by the lake with the chest closed beside him. Max lay curled at his side, watching the water. John turned the letters over in his mind, the words of Samuel Green still echoing in his thoughts. Somewhere in those pages was a story the world was not ready to hear. Somewhere in those words was a choice he would have to make. Expose the truth and risk everything, or bury it again and live in silence. John looked at Max. The dog tilted his head as if sensing the decision weighing on his master. The lake reflected the moonlight, calm but full of hidden depths. For John, that night marked the end of innocence. What had begun as an ordinary morning walk had turned into a moment that would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone who would come to hear what lay inside that chest. John Carter knew he could not keep the discovery to himself. The letters, Samuel Green's confession, and the names contained within were too important to remain hidden. He thought of the soldiers who had trusted one another, of the truth buried in silence, and of the promise in that final letter. But more than anything, John felt the pull of responsibility. This was not just history, it was justice. His first call was to Amelia Hayes, a local journalist whose integrity was known in Willow Creek. Amelia was not just a reporter to John, she was a friend, someone who understood truth was not a matter of convenience. He invited her to his cabin late in the afternoon, offering her the letters and the chest for examination. Amelia arrived, her boots crunching in the fallen leaves, her eyes reflecting the seriousness of what John showed her. They spread the letters on the kitchen table. Amelia read silently, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. When she looked up, her voice was quiet but firm. "John, this isn't just a personal affair. These letters, they contain names, evidence, confessions of war crimes. If this is true, this changes everything. It could shake the nation." John nodded slowly. The weight of those words pressed on him. He had been a soldier, bound by orders and trust, but he knew when silence could be an injustice. Now he faced the hardest decision of his life. They agreed. The letters had to be made public. But when they began to plan, resistance came almost immediately. Government lawyers arrived in Willow Creek within days. Their approach was calm but insistent. "These documents must be turned over," they said. "It's a matter of national security." They offered no explanation, and their presence brought an unspoken warning. The news spread quickly. The small town became a storm center. Reporters arrived, cameras followed, and townsfolk gathered, curious and uneasy. Willow Creek had become a battleground for something far bigger than itself. Tension crackled in the air. At the cafe, whispers passed between strangers. At the docks, fishermen spoke in low voices. Everywhere, people looked to John. At first, John tried to listen to reason. Perhaps the government's concern was genuine. But every meeting with agents only strengthened his suspicion. The truth was being buried again. That realization became a slow-burning anger. It was not just the letters they sought to suppress. It was the silence of the world. And that silence felt like betrayal. One evening, John sat on the porch of his cabin, Max resting at his feet. The dog's dark eyes followed John's every move, sensing his unrest. John clenched his fists, staring out at the lake. The wind carried the sound of waves against the shore, as if urging him to act. "This isn't just about me," he whispered. "It's about what's right." Max lifted his head and let out a low, steady growl. It was not fear, it was resolve. And John understood. This moment was not just a choice, it was a battle. The world could not be allowed to bury the truth. That night, John and Amelia met in secret. Amelia brought her recorder, a camera, and the determination that had defined her career. Together, they began to build a plan. They would find a safe way to release the letters without handing them over to the government, a way to protect the truth while shielding themselves from the storm they knew would follow. The hours stretched long into the night. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. Inside, John worked through the possibilities, his mind sharp despite exhaustion. Amelia spoke softly of leaks, trusted allies, and secure channels. Max slept nearby, guarding the cabin as if knowing what was at stake. By dawn, they had a strategy. The letters would be revealed to the public, not quietly, not without preparation, but on their own terms. John stood by the lake before sunrise, Max at his side. His chest tightened with determination. This was no longer a private matter. It was a fight for justice, and John Carter was ready to stand and be counted. The anger that had grown in him now burned with purpose. The morning the letters were released to the public felt unlike anything Willow Creek had ever seen. John Carter had chosen a secure, trusted channel with Amelia Hayes to ensure the truth would reach the world without being silenced again. Within hours, the story broke nationwide. Headlines ran across newspapers. Social media lit up with discussions. The letters, Eleanor's words, Samuel Green's confessions, the names of officers once considered untouchable, became the spark of a national reckoning. By noon, reporters were calling Willow Creek home. Television crews set up along the lakefront. Cameras rolled on the cafe terrace, where townsfolk gathered. Government officials made statements. Historians debated the contents of the letters in radio interviews and online forums. The quiet town had become the focus of something enormous. John watched it all unfold with measured detachment. He never wanted attention. He never sought to be a hero. His life had been built quietly after the army, tending his cabin, walking with Max, living in peace. Now, the story he and Amelia had unleashed was bigger than either of them, and Willow Creek was at its center. Amelia, ever the relentless journalist, documented every moment. Her article went viral overnight, drawing attention not only to the letters, but to the idea of hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. Investigations were launched, committees were formed, even arrests were made of those implicated. Justice, however slow, had begun to move. By evening, the bustle in Willow Creek softened, replaced by a reflective hush. John stepped away from the commotion and walked toward the lake, Max padding silently beside him. The air was cool with the scent of autumn leaves, and the sun cast long golden streaks over the water. The lake seemed unchanged, serene as ever, as if unaware of the storm that had passed. John stood at the edge of the shore, looking down at the ripples under the evening sky. Max sat beside him, alert but calm, his eyes reflecting the fading light. John felt a strange sense of stillness wash over him. The weight of the secret they had carried was gone. The truth was out. The chest, buried for decades and uncovered by a dog's persistence, had changed lives forever. Relief settled in him like a quiet tide. It was not relief born of victory in the sense of conquest, but of resolution. John had carried a burden, the choice to speak out or remain silent, and he had chosen truth. That choice had cost him peace, brought him scrutiny, and drawn danger. But it had also brought something far deeper, a conviction that loyalty, courage, and truth still mattered. That night, the veterans of Willow Creek gathered at the local cafe. They filled the room with low conversation, laughter, and the clinking of mugs. They toasted quietly to John and Max. Their voices carried gratitude, admiration, and a shared sense of history reclaimed. To them, this was more than a story. It was a reminder that even in quiet places, great truths could be found. John accepted the toast with a nod, standing at the back of the cafe with Max by his side. He did not seek applause, but there was a warmth in the gesture, a recognition that went deeper than words. Outside, the wind carried the soft sound of the lake, gentle against the shore. That night, John returned to his cabin, carrying the quiet peace that comes after storms. Max followed closely, tail wagging in slow rhythm. John placed the letters back in the chest and set it in a corner of the cabin, a relic now transformed. It was no longer just an object buried under sand. It was a symbol of truth uncovered, of courage tested, of justice set in motion. John sat on his porch with Max, watching the stars appear over Willow Creek. Somewhere deep in his heart, he felt the weight of what had happened ease, the anger, the fear, the uncertainty. They had been replaced by relief, not just because the truth had been told, but because, in a world where silence often wins, they had chosen to speak. And that, John knew, was worth everything.